3 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a vast domain where sunlight is a myth and pressure kills without hesitation, a graveyard sleeps. Steel bones of forgotten vessels lie half consumed by rust, scattered across mud plains that no human eyes will ever directly behold. It is a kingdom of darkness, ruled by cold and silence, punctuated only by the slow drift of sediment and the occasional groan of shifting metal long dead to the world above. Down here, secrets can last forever, or at least they once could. In March of 1968, one of those secrets was born in the crushing black. 98 men sealed inside a steel tomb, 3 nuclear missiles, code machines, manuals, the operational heart of a superpower. The submarine was named K-129, and its disappearance would become a ghost that haunted 2 nations, one searching desperately for answers, the other listening quietly in the dark, waiting for an opportunity that might never come again. It began on a gray morning in the North Pacific. K-129 had been on what Soviet Naval Command considered a routine patrol, if anything in the nuclear age could truly be called routine. Her captains performed the last scheduled radio check, a simple confirmation of position, latitude 40 degrees north, longitude 180 east, drifting near the vast line where hemispheres meet. Everything sounded normal. Crew movements, dial clicks, a faint hum of machinery. Then the transmission ended. No one heard from her again. When the submarine failed to report in at the next interval, Naval Headquarters in Kamchatka reacted with trained calm. Delays happened. Communication sometimes faltered. Atmospheric interference could distort or swallow signals. But as the hours rolled into a day, then 2, then 3, calm dissolved into unease. Fleets were mobilized.
Radio men checked and rechecked systems. Officers paced hallways, lighting cigarettes with trembling fingers, the ash falling into piles that told stories of worry. The Earth's largest navy had lost one of its own, and with her the lives of almost 100 sailors, fathers, sons, young conscripts who had never known another life. The search lasted 70 days. Soviet ships fanned out across the Pacific in massive grids, eyes scanning dull horizons, sonar beams combing depths where machines often failed. From space, satellites watched the Soviet Navy's frantic ballet, but down in the water, there was nothing. No oil slick, no floating debris, no emergency spar buoy. K-129 had vanished as though swallowed by the ocean itself. Some officers whispered sabotage, others whispered mutiny, but no evidence surfaced. In Moscow, the disappearance became a wound the government dared not examine too closely. What the Soviets did not know, what they could not have known, was that hundreds of miles away, at a nondescript U.S. naval facility tucked into the deep green and volcanic ridges of Hawaii, a group of young technicians had heard the submarine's final, terrible moments. Inside the dimly lit operations room at Barber's Point, rows of analysts sat with padded headphones cupping their ears, the glow of oscilloscopes casting blue halos around their faces. They were the listeners, custodians of a secret system known as SOSUS, an array of underwater microphones that stretched across ocean floors like a network of nerves. The Pacific was full of noise, whale songs, shifting tectonic plates, storms. But among those sounds, the trained ear could discern the rhythm of propellers, the signature of engine harmonics, the crushing collapse of a pressure hull. Shortly after K-129's final transmission, the system picked up something strange, a thunderous metallic groan, followed by a cavernous implosion that reverberated like the sound of a collapsing cathedral. Then a long, spiraling descent, captured not visually, but sonically, an eerie wail of tortured metal twisting downward for miles. Finally, a distant boom as steel met seafloor at 16,500 feet.
The listeners triangulated. Calculations confirmed. K-129 had not merely sunk. She had been annihilated by the vicious pressures of the deep, and the United States alone knew her grave. News traveled quickly to Langley. In a locked room beneath the CIA's headquarters, where fluorescent lights hummed above conference tables piled with classified files, senior officials examined reports with growing fascination. A Soviet nuclear missile submarine had died in one of the most inaccessible places on Earth. Its technology, its guidance systems, codes, weapons lay intact, unreachable to the Soviets, invisible to the world. A question surfaced, one that hovered like static electricity in the air. Could they retrieve it? More importantly, should they? The question was insane. No one had ever attempted a salvage at anything close to such depth. No machine existed that could lift 1,700 tons of broken steel through nearly 3 miles of crushing water. Submarine hulls were never meant to be raised. They were tombs sealed forever by physics and the unforgiving ocean. Yet as discussions evolved, the impossible began to feel merely improbable. Engineers were consulted. Navy specialists were brought in discreetly. What they proposed bordered on madness. A claw the size of a building, a ship larger than any built for deep-water operations, and a system so complex that one miscalculation could rip equipment apart or snap cables like wet thread. But if it worked, if even a portion of K-129 could be recovered, the United States could peer directly into the technological heart of its greatest adversary. The potential intelligence value was beyond measure. In the silent tension of the Cold War, knowledge could shift global power. Thus was born a project so secret that even its name was cloaked, Azorian.
The plan needed a cover story. Something grandiose, something absurd enough to seem harmless. The CIA turned to a man who lived in myth as much as in reality, Howard Hughes. Billionaire industrialist, recluse, king of eccentric ventures. Hughes' public persona was perfect camouflage. If the world heard he was building a massive ship to mine minerals from the ocean floor, few would question it. People expected him to chase wild, visionary ideas. In Las Vegas, behind tinted windows of a penthouse suite Hughes almost never left, the arrangement was quietly set. The Hughes organization would front the construction of an immense ship, the Glomar Explorer. On paper, it would be a deep-sea mining vessel, testing new methods to harvest manganese nodules from the seabed. In truth, it was a machine built for theft on an unprecedented scale. Shipyards buzzed with activity, fabricating components that most workers didn't fully understand. Massive cranes hoisted steel frames into place. Welders fused joints. Engineers mapped out hidden bays and secret compartments where a captured submarine section would be concealed during retrieval. The ship was designed with remarkable innovations. A towering derrick for lowering pipe strings, stabilizers that fought ocean swells, and a sprawling well beneath the hull called the moon pool that could open to the sea like a gate. Meanwhile, in another secured facility, work began on Clementine, the heart of the operation. Clementine was a mechanical claw, but calling it a claw oversimplified the engineering marvel. It was a recovery vehicle as large as a football field, weighing thousands of tons. Its giant fingers were designed to clasp the broken hull of K-129 like hands closing around a fallen relic. The entire structure would be lowered by a single cable, 1 inch thick, yet strong enough to withstand unimaginable strain. Connected through 300 segments of pipe, each lifted and locked through the ship's derrick like a giant metallic spine stretching into the deep. Every element of the design presented risk. The depth alone was an existential challenge. 16,500 feet meant pressure above 8,000 pounds per square inch. Steel behaved differently at such depths. It flexed, creaked, buckled. The claw had to be delicately precise and brutally strong at the same time. If a single weld failed, if a bolt cracked, if the smallest fraction of alignment was off, everything would be lost. Engineers debated for hours over millimeters, and always a darker thought loomed. If the Soviets suspected anything, if they caught even a whisper of truth, the operation could escalate beyond diplomacy.
Ships could clash, nuclear tensions could surge. The Cold War had flashpoints everywhere. Azorian threatened to become one of them. Years passed, budgets ballooned, the timeline stretched, but the goal remained unchanged. Reach the submarine, steal it from the ocean floor, and leave without the world ever knowing. On July 4th, 1974, while Americans celebrated in backyards and on beaches, fireworks glittering in the twilight sky, the Hughes Glomar Explorer glided into the remote swath of Pacific where K-129 slept. The ship appeared on no public manifests. The crew worked under aliases. Only a handful on board understood the true purpose of their mission. At first, the sea seemed empty, gray, quiet, indifferent. But by the next morning, dark shapes appeared on the horizon, Soviet vessels. They approached slowly at first, then closer, until they hovered 200 yards away, near enough for binoculars to capture the faces of the Americans aboard the Explorer. Helicopters circled, cameras clicked. The Soviets were suspicious, but they saw what appeared to be a mining ship, eccentric and enormous in typical Hughes fashion. The crew played their part, waving cheerfully, pointing to supposed mineral processing equipment, lounging casually on deck as though nothing extraordinary was happening beneath their feet. But deep inside the ship, the real work had begun. Clementine descended into the abyss, the world above faded away, darkness thickened, cold swallowed everything. The descent took days.
Technicians monitored sonar screens, listening for faint echoes that indicated the claw's progress. At last, they reached the depth where K-129 had been located. There was no visibility. No camera could function in the absolute black. The operators used sonar to feel their way forward, mapping the wreck, aligning the claw. When the massive fingers made contact, tension rippled through the crew. Slowly, carefully, they closed. The entire vehicle locked around the remains of the submarine. No one spoke for several seconds. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Then began the ascent. What happened next changed the operation from daring to desperate. But I will continue from here if you'd like. The ascent began with a tension that settled into every muscle, every breath aboard the Glomar Explorer. On monitors across the ship, the depth gauge ticked upward in increments so small they seemed designed to torture the human mind. 3 miles of cable groaned beneath the deck, and with it rose the heaviest secret the Cold War had ever produced. The claw held the broken submarine like an enormous skeletal hand, its steel fingers clasped around a 100-foot section of K-129's hull. Inside that section might lie the holy grail of intelligence: guidance systems, code books, cryptographic gear, anything the Soviets would consider catastrophic if compromised. But none of that mattered unless the section made it to the surface. Engineers hovered at their stations, eyes fixed on oscillating lines representing stress, tension, torque. The cable itself was an engineering miracle, a single-inch-thick lifeline that now bore the weight of history. Every foot ascended increased the strain on it, magnifying vibrations, each tremor a threat. The ocean pressed down relentlessly. The ship's stabilizers fought it, adjusting constantly to keep its massive frame steady as the pipe string rose, segment by painstaking segment.
Above deck, wind whipped across steel surfaces. Crewmen moved quietly, murmuring only what was necessary. They avoided looking too often at the nearby Soviet ships, which continued their silent vigil. The Soviets still suspected nothing, or at least had nothing they could prove. They watched a mining ship and saw nothing more. The Americans, meanwhile, prayed that the sea's indifference would last a little longer. Inside the operations compartment, a low hum filled the air. It came from machines, from the ship, from the earth itself. The men living inside that hum became attuned to every change in its pitch. To them, the operation felt alive, a creature breathing through hydraulic pumps and humming through power relays, its pulse beating through the long spine of pipe stretching into the sea. At 6,000 feet above the seafloor, the strain on the cable increased dramatically. Charts predicted that the tension curve would spike here, where temperature gradients and pressure shifts created unpredictable loads. Engineers leaned in, fingers poised above emergency stop controls in case the cable began to fray. Tiny fibers in steel could snap silently, then catastrophically. The ascent continued. 7,000 feet. 8,000. The ship rocked slightly in swells unseen below. Stabilizer fins swung out automatically, countering the movement, holding the ship steady in a delicate dance with forces it was never meant to conquer. 9,000 feet. It happened in an instant, and yet it felt like the slow-motion birth of a nightmare. First came a tremor, so small that only the instruments registered it. A jitter in the tension diagram, a fractional spike that lasted less than a second. Then came the sound, a deep metallic crack that reverberated up the pipe string like a hammer striking a cathedral bell. Someone shouted. Someone else froze. Eyes widened. Pulses quickened. Before anyone could act, the tremor escalated. Alarms erupted across the room, urgent red lights strobing. On the monitors, stress values climbed beyond safety thresholds. Metal screamed, a long, tortured wail that carried through the ship's bones.
Then the impossible happened. The submarine broke. The load dropped sharply. Every engineer knew what that meant before the data finished updating. The claw had held, but K-129 had not. The hull section being lifted had succumbed to gravity and pressure and decades of deep-sea decay. With the upward force too great and structural integrity too fragile, the submarine tore itself apart against Clementine's fingers. A thunderous groan came through the pipe string as the lower portion of the hull, containing the sail, the missile hatches, and possibly the cryptographic center, ripped away and plummeted into darkness. The shockwave traveled up through metal and into the ship, causing the entire frame to shudder. Operators could only watch as sonar screens showed a ghostly cascade of debris tumbling, swirling, then vanishing into the endless black miles below. The room went silent except for alarms gradually fading as engineers reset systems. Men swallowed hard. Some cursed, some put their hands on their heads, absorbing the loss. The greatest prize of the Cold War had just slipped through steel fingertips and returned to the abyss forever. But not everything was lost. The claw still held a substantial section of hull, 60 feet according to real-time measurements. It was the aftmost portion that had remained intact, still clamped firmly in Clementine's steel embrace. It contained no missiles, possibly no codes, maybe not even anything of immediate intelligence value. But it contained something else. Bodies. That realization came slowly as the ascent resumed. The mission had changed, its grand ambitions scarred but not destroyed. They would salvage what remained, they would study whatever was recovered, and they would not let the dead return to the sea without honoring their humanity. When the pipe string finally reached the surface, after days of tension, fatigue, and precision, the ship's massive moon pool opened like the jaws of a leviathan.
Water churned below, surging as hydraulic systems maneuvered Clementine and its captured hull section into position. When the first glimpse of the submarine fragment emerged through the frothing water, observers leaned forward in awe. It was a broken coffin of steel. Torn edges curled like jagged petals. Barnacles clung to rusted plates. Silt dripped from cracks. The deep had claimed it long ago, but now it rose again, unwillingly resurrected into the world of sunlight. Teams in protective gear surrounded the recovered section. Their goal was not simply to inspect, but to preserve, document, and understand. America had just brought up part of a Soviet nuclear submarine, a feat many thought impossible. Inside the mangled steel, amid twisted pipes and collapsed bulkheads, they found what they feared: human remains. Not many, 6 in the section that had survived the crushing descent. Their bodies were contorted by pressure and time, faces obscured, uniforms tattered, yet they were unmistakably sailors, brothers, fathers, men who had once climbed ladders, joked in mess halls, worried about home, lived normal rhythms of life aboard a vessel that had become their tomb. The recovery team felt a sobering shift in atmosphere. Intelligence mattered, operations mattered, geopolitical advantage mattered, but here in close quarters with the reality of death, the Cold War's abstraction dissolved. These were not enemies, they were mariners lost to the deep. A decision was made at high levels, one that spoke to a deeper human instinct. The sailors would be given a burial with honor. Preparations were made quietly, without fanfare, and without witnesses beyond those who needed to know. A ceremony was assembled. The bodies were placed in simple metal casks, draped respectfully. A recording device was set up, its purpose not fully explained to the crew.
On the deck of the Glomar Explorer, the Pacific wind sighed as the small group assembled. A chaplain, flown in under cover of routine crew rotation, spoke solemn words. A Soviet naval hymn, obtained through back channels, played softly, a gesture of respect in a world defined by opposition. One by one, the caskets slid into the water, not thrown, not dumped, but lowered with care, as though handing the sailors back to the sea rather than discarding them. Some crewmen bowed their heads. Others stared outward, watching the ocean swallow the caskets, absorbing the enormity of a moment few would ever know occurred. Years later, a film of that ceremony would make its way to Moscow, where families found closure and officials found a rare glimpse into the kindness of an adversary. But for now, the ceremony faded into memory, and the mission returned to its controlled chaos. Word of the break, the loss of the most critical parts of the submarine, traveled up the intelligence chain. Analysts examined the recovered section, documenting machinery, metallurgy, design choices, anything that could be gleaned from the twisted steel. Some findings were valuable, others were mundane, but all were guarded jealously. Plans began for a second mission, a return to the site, an attempt to lift the remaining portions of K-129 that had slipped back to the abyss. Engineers theorized improvements. CIA leadership debated logistics. If they could make the claw stronger, reinforce the lifting arms, perhaps they could capture the lost sections on another attempt. But before such ambitions could solidify, human error intervened. Not on a ship, not in the ocean, but in an office tower owned by Howard Hughes. The burglary that occurred there in 1974 would alter the course of the secret operation more profoundly than any engineering failure. Burglars broke into the building, common thieves looking for money or valuables, and stumbled upon documents linking Hughes's operations directly to the CIA's covert project. They had no idea what they had uncovered, but others did. By early 1975, journalists investigating the break-in followed the trail. They pieced together rumors of a massive ship built for mysterious purposes. They connected Hughes Industries to a classified operation, and eventually they arrived at the unthinkable truth. In March 1975, headlines exploded across the United States. A CIA plot to steal a Soviet submarine, a secret salvage ship built under false pretenses, millions of dollars spent on a covert underwater heist. The world learned the name Project Azorian. The CIA responded with a phrase that would become legendary in intelligence circles: "We can neither confirm nor deny." And with that, the second mission, still in planning, still wildly ambitious, collapsed beneath the weight of exposure. The operation was effectively dead, its secrets spilled into the open, its future destroyed by journalism and chance. Yet the legacy of Azorian was far from over. The headlines spread like wildfire, leaping from coast to toast, from newsprint to primetime broadcasts, from whispered rumor to national obsession. What had taken the CIA years to build in silence unraveled in a matter of days. Reporters pored over leaked documents, interviewed shipyard workers, tracked financial trails linking Hughes' empire to hidden government funding.
The story grew legs, then wings, mutating into speculation and conjecture. The truth, already fantastical, became stranger with each retelling. For the men who had lived the operation, the exposure felt like a violation. They had labored under secrecy, many separated from family without explanation, bound by oaths and non-disclosure agreements that weighed heavier now that the world was pointing fingers. Some felt pride that the mission was being recognized, even if inaccurately. Others felt fear, wondering if they would be made scapegoats or if foreign governments might retaliate.
Inside Langley, the mood was bleak. The CIA was no stranger to controversy, but this was different. Azorian had been its crown jewel, its moonshot, the perfect fusion of engineering audacity and intelligence ambition. Now, instead of classified briefings in secure vaults, the operation was being dissected on evening news panels by anchors who could not distinguish a ballast tank from a missile tube. The Soviets, meanwhile, reacted with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Officially, they dismissed the reports as American propaganda, fabricated stories designed to humiliate the Soviet Navy. Unofficially, their naval intelligence scrambled to assess how much of K-129 had been recovered, and how badly their secrets had been compromised. Diplomatic channels crackled with tension. Requests for confirmation were sent. Responses came back cold and empty. And always the same phrase: "We can neither confirm nor deny." That line infuriated Soviet officials, but they could do little more than protest. The Pacific was international waters. The submarine had lain undiscovered for years. Legally, ethically, morally, none of it mattered. The ocean did not recognize ownership once it claimed something. The dead at its floor belonged to no flag. In the United States, congressional hearings began. Men who had never seen a submarine up close berated officials about wasted budgets and covert operations. Former naval officers defended the mission's necessity. Politicians grandstanded. Intelligence veterans warned of long-term consequences if classified capabilities were exposed. The hearings became theater. Part accountability, part ritual, part performance for cameras and constituents. Behind the scenes, the CIA quietly locked down every remaining document connected to Azorian. Files were transferred to deeper vaults. Physical blueprints disappeared from public-facing archives. Personnel were reassigned or debriefed under heavier security protocols. Azorian became a ghost mission, acknowledged but never fully explained. And still, the Glomar Explorer sailed.
Not as a spy ship, not as a salvage vessel, but as the mining platform it was built to pretend to be. For years after the scandal, the ship continued operations, drilling, researching, acting as a curious footnote in maritime engineering history. Her true purpose remained an open secret, whispered among sailors and naval historians. Engineers marveled at her design, unaware they were admiring a machine built for the world's most audacious heist. For a time, the world gradually forgot. Stories faded beneath new crises. Political scandals, wars abroad, economic turmoil. The Cold War continued its slow, grinding course, shifting through detente and resurgence. Submarines still prowled beneath oceans, but none carried quite the same aura of tragedy and mystery as K-129. On the seafloor, the remaining portions of the submarine rested untouched. Their jagged edges were softened by silt and time. Crabs crawled across once classified metal. Small fish wove in and out of shattered compartments that had once housed nuclear weapons. The deep cold preserved and erased in equal measure. Down there, among pressure and darkness, K-129 became part of the ocean's memory. Yet the story did not end with the failed recovery or the scandal. It continued in subtler ways, in innovations that outlived their original purpose. The technologies developed for Clementine inspired advancements in deep-sea mining. Materials engineered to withstand crushing depths were later used in submersibles exploring the Mariana Trench.
Hydraulic systems designed for Azorian became templates for modern submarine rescue equipment. Even the concept of the moon pool found broader application in offshore drilling and oceanographic research. The Cold War produced many shadows: proxy wars, covert operations, clandestine negotiations, but few have the strange mix of engineering brilliance, ethical ambiguity, and sheer ambition that defined Azorian. The mission symbolized a willingness to reach into impossible places, to test the limits of human ingenuity against the most inhospitable environment on Earth.
And yet, despite the grandeur, Azorian remained haunted by what it failed to achieve. The most valuable section of K-129 still lay in the abyss, inaccessible. It would never rise. For decades afterward, various proposals emerged: robotic retrievals, advanced claw systems, submersibles capable of deep-sea penetration, but none were approved. The political cost, the financial burden, and the lack of pressing intelligence need rendered each idea inert. Officially, the United States declared the site undisturbed, unvisited, left to its eternal rest. Unofficially, rumors persisted. Oceanographers studying sonar anomalies claimed to see shapes too regular to be natural. Retired engineers whispered of classified expeditions hidden behind layers of redacted reports. But nothing concrete ever surfaced. Most likely, the wreck remained where it fell, broken, silent, waiting. The CIA's internal history of Azorian was written in fragments. Some pages were filled with pride, the engineering triumph, the calculated risk, the human determination that carried the mission further than reason predicted. Other pages held regret, the break, the failure to secure the submarine's core secrets, the political fallout that overshadowed the achievement. But one thing was consistent across every classified account: respect for the men who died aboard K-129. Years after the burial at sea, when diplomatic tensions momentarily eased, a quiet meeting took place in Geneva. A representative of the United States handed over a sealed package to a Soviet official. Inside was a copy of the burial ceremony. Grainy footage of the deck of the Glomar Explorer, the hymn playing, the caskets lowered gently into the Pacific. The Soviet official opened the package later, alone. It is said he wept. For the families of the lost sailors, the film brought closure. They could see, after years of silence, lies, and uncertainty, that their sons had been treated with dignity in death. The ocean had taken them, but their enemy had honored them. Time passed. The Cold War ended. The world shifted.
Records were declassified in small waves. Historians pieced together a clearer picture of Azorian. Some details remained forever obscured, locked behind redactions or lost in the churn of agency reorganizations. But enough emerged to give shape to the story, a mosaic of ambition, secrecy, innovation, tragedy, and the strange morality of espionage at sea. In 2010, when the CIA officially acknowledged the operation, the world reacted not with shock, but with fascination. By then, Azorian had become legend, a tale of a ship built under the guise of mining, a massive claw reaching into the abyss, a daring attempt to steal a nuclear submarine from the ocean floor. What had once been scandal was now history. What had once been impossible was now an accepted chapter in the annals of intelligence work. And yet, even with truth exposed, even with documents released, even with historians poring over every available scrap, Azorian retains an air of mystery. No one outside the intelligence community fully knows what was found in the recovered section. No one knows if any cryptographic material survived. No one knows whether additional data was gleaned from metallurgical analysis or internal machinery. Some believe the recovered material offered nothing useful. Others believe it provided insights that shaped decades of submarine design. But the deepest mystery remains untouched. The 2/3 of K-129 that still lies in the silent black. 3 miles down, cold currents swirled across steel that once bore the symbols of a nation that no longer exists. The submarine sleeps on a slope of sediment, its contours softened by the pressure of the eternal dark. No ships pass overhead with intention. No cameras probe its remains. It exists in a state between history and myth, a relic that cannot be touched again, protected by the very forces that destroyed it. Some secrets are never meant to surface. And perhaps, in the end, the ocean made the final decision.
The years that followed were quiet, not in the world which churned endlessly with new conflicts and technologies, but in the secret memory of those who had lived Project Azorian. Time had a way of softening edges, rounding off corners of pain and regret, and yet certain images refused to dull. The strange hum of the Glomar Explorer's engines during its descent into the mid-Pacific, the distant groan of iron 12,000 feet below, the grinding snap when the claw lost its hold, the solemn lowering of foreign sailors into American waters with the hymn playing while the sun bled orange across the horizon. Even decades later, those who had been there could still recall the scent of ocean steel, the vibration through the deck during the lift, the heavy silence after the break. People who shared those moments recognized one another instantly, even in old age, the way veterans do, with that quiet nod acknowledging an experience beyond words. By the turn of the century, many of the key figures were retired, some passing away with secrets they had sworn to take to their graves. Their stories remain tucked inside classified vaults, scattered among forgotten briefing folders and redacted memos, buried under layers of bureaucracy and time. Younger CAA officers heard of the operation in whispers, not lectures, in rumor, not training manuals. To them, Azorian was a ghost mission, a half-remembered tale that felt like something between engineering folklore and Cold War myth. The Glomar Explorer herself had long since been sold, refitted, renamed, repurposed. For a while she served in offshore drilling. Later she became a curiosity in maritime circles, an artifact whose original purpose was too strange to believe, yet too documented to deny. Eventually even that life ended. Economic shifts pushed her into disuse. Photos circulated of her stripped interior, rust spreading across the deck, scaffolding creeping like vines along the hull. The ship that once held the world's attention died quietly, piece by piece. When she was finally scrapped, it wasn't front-page news. A few naval blogs marked the event. A handful of Cold War historians wrote short obituaries. But for most, the passing went unseen, unnoticed. A legend reduced to metal and memory.
Yet the end of a ship does not erase the story it carried. In the early 2010s, as files continued to be declassified in slow, reluctant waves, a clearer picture of Azorian emerged, but never a complete one. The CIA released footage of the burial ceremony at sea, startling in its simple dignity. Ordinary Americans watched grainy shapes of men carrying foreign sailors to their final rest. For a moment, the harshness of Cold War rivalry softened, revealing something human behind the acronyms and operations. Russian families saw the footage too. Many wept. Others wrote letters, some of gratitude, some of confusion, some of quiet grief. What mattered was that the dead were no longer lost to rumor or bureaucratic evasion. Their final moments, though held by a distant and rival nation, were handled with a respect few expected. Historians debated the strategic significance of the recovered section. Some argued that the mission influenced nuclear submarine design on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Others believed that the salvage yielded minimal intelligence, and the operation's legacy was instead its technological innovation. Engineers saw Azorian as proof that humanity could reach farther into the unknown than logic insisted. Ethicists saw it as a complex, morally tangled act, part salvage, part espionage, part eulogy. But beneath all analysis lay the simplest truth. The ocean had given up only what it chose to. Far below the surface, in a world without sunlight, the remaining 2/3 of K129 lay in unbroken quiet.
The pressures of the deep were constant, the water in eternal night pressing against twisted metal. Small sea creatures glided past the corroded hull, indifferent to the history they brushed against. Subcritical nuclear warheads, long inert, lay inside shattered missile tubes. Rust expanded like frost along the seams. The ocean floor, always shifting, slowly claimed the wreck as part of itself. There were no plans to return. Not now, not in any foreseeable future. Technology might one day make such depths more accessible, but purpose had drained away with the Cold War. The world had moved on. Rivalries had changed shape. Nations competed in cyberspace, in orbit, in markets, not in clandestine hunts for lost submarines.
Still, the Pacific remembered. Occasionally, modern survey ships passing miles above would register faint anomalies on sonar, shapes echoing the curvature of something man-made. Operators marked the data with neutral labels, seabed irregularity, possible debris field. These notations accumulated in digital archives, unnoticed by all but a few oceanologists. Someday, perhaps, a graduate student sifting through old sonar files would pause, zoom in, and wonder. But K-129 would remain where it was, a silent time capsule sealed by depth and darkness. In a quiet corner of the CIA headquarters, in a locked vault accessible to fewer than a dozen people, sat the remaining complete archive of Project Azorian. Inside were blueprints of the Clementine Claw, engineering schematics written in careful hand, internal memos filled with urgency, photographs taken aboard the Glomar Explorer, and personal notes from officers who had agonized over every detail. Interspersed among the documents were reminders of the crew of K-129, names, photos, fragments of biography, details gathered posthumously from Soviet records. One memo, handwritten by a senior analyst shortly after the burial, captured the sentiment rarely spoken aloud. "We came as adversaries, we left as mourners. The sea makes brothers of us all." The analyst died years later. His memo remains. In Russia, the memory of K-129 also endured. Monuments were erected in Vladivostok and Petropavlovsk. Former submarine officers attended annual ceremonies honoring lost crews. Families who had waited decades for truth now had something tangible to mourn. On some anniversaries, elderly parents who had survived the Soviet Union's collapse came carrying faded photographs. Younger generations stood beside them, learning a story that had once been forbidden to speak aloud. When Russians learned the full extent of the burial at sea, their reactions were mixed. Some found solace, others found bitterness. Most found something unexpected, a shared recognition that beneath politics and ideology, sailors were sailors, and the sea made no distinction between flags. Years later, a retired CIA engineer, one who had worked on Clementine's hydraulics, visited a maritime museum where a model of the Glomar Explorer had recently been installed. He stood quietly before the display, reading the placard that reduced years of his life to 3 neat paragraphs. Children passed by, pointing at the strange shape of the ship, asking their parents what it had done. The parents read the plaque and shrugged. A docent said a few rehearsed facts. No one noticed the old man's eyes lingering on the miniature claw, on the moon pool, on the replica drilling derrick. No one noticed his hand tremble slightly as he whispered, "We almost had her." For a long moment, he stayed there, suspended between memory and the present, between pride and sorrow. Then he quietly stepped away. In time, all who had been part of the operation passed into history. Their names faded from public memory, surviving only in classified rosters and the footnotes of specialized books. But the story they helped shape endured, rippling outward through engineering textbooks, naval lore, intelligence studies, and documentary films. Project Azorian became a symbol, not of triumph or failure,
but of the strange intersection where human ingenuity meets the unyielding forces of nature. It represented ambition unrestrained by practicality, a willingness to reach into the depths that seemed beyond reach. It embodied the contradictions of espionage, secrecy wrapped in spectacle, danger wrapped in necessity, morality wrapped in calculation. Yet, for all its complexity, the heart of the story was simple. A submarine was lost. A nation grieved. Another nation sought answers. Men built impossible machines to descend into a world that resists all intrusion. They reached down. The deep reached back. And when the ocean refused to yield entirely, they honored the dead they could recover. History rarely ends neatly. Most stories dissolve into ambiguity, leaving questions unanswered. Project Azorian is no different. The ocean keeps its secrets, and the deepest secrets it keeps forever. But somewhere out there, in the vast, silent plain of the northern Pacific, two ships lie far apart, one on the seafloor, one dismantled on land, yet bound together in the strange way that history binds unlikely partners. One was built in secrecy. One died in silence. Both became legends. And the ocean, eternal and indifferent, continues to hold what remains.